Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us today, first of all. My question to you is, as an author, I imagine there are certain themes you write that you covet maybe a little more than others. And when turning a book into a movie, there has to be a little bit of give, of course. But as the author and a producer, was there a specific scene in which you were a little sensitive about that you wanted it to be done exactly how you wrote it?
There's always, every scene feels like that, but there are some that you are more sensitive about. I think with the host, the ones that really, when Ian is telling Wanda she can't go, that one I was really keyed up for, and I know that Jake and Andrew and I, on the day of, did some fine-tuning where I wanted more anger, and Jake's like, I feel angry. It was awesome, and we got there, Sometimes it takes a couple of takes, but you get the emotions that you're looking for. But there's always, trying to think if there were any others. It's a lot of Ian and Wanda moments were more important to me. I'm not sure why that is. I think that Ian, as a character, his arc is maybe the most interesting for me. So that might be why those are the ones I'm more sensitive about.
Yeah, okay. That's awesome. That's awesome to know. Thank you.
My question is, do you have any funny stories from being on the set of The Host? If so, can you relate one?
Okay, I'm trying to think of one. Most of the funny stories are with people that you don't know. And so it's kind of hard. It's like, this person you don't know, and we have this funny nickname for them that makes no sense because you can't see them. I'm trying to think of one that with the actors that I'm allowed to tell. That's the other problem. There are confident, being on set is a lot like being in confessional. There are some things that are just sacred that you don't talk about. You know what? Saoirse's dad, Paul, is incredibly funny and this really great storyteller. And so at some point, I need him to tell the story about the solar lights and hawing on the lights, which makes no sense to you. But, you sit around and talk a lot, and we had some really good storytellers. It was fun. Hold on just a second. What was that? Did somebody was...
Just do the night shoots.
Oh, the night shoots also you get a little bit weird on. I have my partner in crime over here, and she probably remembers more stories than I do. Am I missing one?
I don't think any that you can repeat.
Okay, because they're not repeatable. Sorry, guys. I'll try and think of one. If I get one by the end, I'll tell you.
I was wondering, with adaptations, we often find that screenwriters and directors have to make allowances or take their own liberties when putting something on screen. And I was just wondering if you considered this a relatively true adaptation to the book, or if there were a lot of liberties being taken to make it more visually appealing.
I feel like this one is probably the most true to the book of any of my work that's been adapted. Of course, there's the huge liberty being taken of shortening it down to 120 pages. And so there are all kinds of scenes that I love, little scenes, big scenes, that you just have to peel away to be able to do this as a movie. And that's the first, that's that great big hurdle at the very beginning. And then after that, once we got down to the core story, then everything felt very, very true to who the characters were. Some of the little changes were actually things that I loved. I felt like Andrew had such a good sense for the world that he came up with stuff I wish I'd had. Like his Seekers don't use guns. I mean, Diane eventually gets there because she's sort of having a breakdown, but his Seekers just use a spray that knocks people out. And I was thinking, of course that's what they would do. In my books, it was all about them kind of having this, inner struggle to have to use human weapons to be able to exist safely. But then no, they would have something better. So then I was kind of bummed that I hadn't done that. But mostly, this one just felt really, really, really how the book feels to me.
So I have a really quick question first, and then there's time way at the end I have a longer one. But my big question is, why should guys who might not have seen Twilight go see The Host?
Well, my family, which is, I have a large immediate family and a very larger family, the men in my life enjoy the host a lot more than they enjoy Twilight. And I feel, Twilight is all about falling in love with a beautiful boy. And so if you are not inclined to do that in your life, you might feel a little estranged from the work. The host is about so much more than that. It's a much wider slice of life and like a more real, I feel like, balance to life. Even though it's science fiction and the main character isn't human, I think there's a lot more that you can relate to. And I don't think it'll have the same feel of this is just a romance. It has more important questions. So I think that men will feel at home.
My question is, you've gotten to see a lot of your characters be adapted to the screen. Which actor or actors has their performance been the most faithful to how you imagined the character?
Well, this is how I judge that. Generally, I'm very easily able to keep my mental vision of the character separate from the movie version, and they're two very separate people. But the one, even though physically not the closest resemblance that I've worked with, Saoirse really got in my head, where she kind of took over the character for me, and I can still work to see my Melanie, who was older and darker and different, but she sort of stole Wanda from my mind, and so I think she'd have to be the one that nailed it the closest.
So in my opinion, much of Twilight's success lends itself to Rob and Kristen's chemistry they have in it. Would you say that the boys and Saoirse have that same kind of chemistry, and was that key in making the decision for casting them in each of their respective roles?
Absolutely. I mean, chemistry was the number one thing we were looking for when we were auditioning. Once we knew Saoirse was in, it all became about who is going to compliment her on the screen, how is it going to make you feel. And the interesting thing is that there are two different relationships happening here, because it's not Saoirse with Max and Saoirse with Jake. It's Wanda with Jake and Melanie with Max, and she's two different people, and she's so amazingly talented. It's very distinct. And so we actually had to have two very separate kinds of chemistry because Wanda doesn't fall in love with the same way that Melanie does. And that was really interesting. I think it worked out fantastically. I remember watching their auditions, and that's the first thing Andrew told me about Max, because I wasn't around for that one because it was in London, and he said, wait, the chemistry, you can cut it with a knife in that room. And it was totally there. And then Jake, who I have always loved as an actor, and he just has that leading man charisma. I was really nervous to watch his audition because I thought he was going to be really great for it. And then it was totally there. Oh man, I still remember like this hug that he gave her, where just the shape of them suddenly was something new and really interesting. I was like, oh, so there. So yeah, that was a big part of it, and I mean that was the part of it. That was how we cast, and I feel like it really came through.
So we were wondering if you find yourself protective or defensive of the host when the movie and the fandom and all the expectations are going to be compared to Twilight. Do you feel like extra protective of the host that you may not if Twilight hadn't existed first?
Absolutely. I mean, that really nailed it. It's hard because it is such a different book for me, and it's my favorite book. And Twilight had this passionate following and also a lot of passionate hatred attached to it. It was very double-sided. For all the good, there was equal negative, and I feel like the negative's coming into play a lot here, and it just makes me really angry, like when someone picks on your kid at school, because this kid hasn't done anything wrong. This kid is totally innocent, and the performances these actors gave us. The caliber that we have going on here. William freaking Hurt
comes in and just owns this movie.
And then you've got Andrew Niccol and his amazing, beautiful vision. It's like, it is so not fair to judge this movie, but then on the other side of it, would it have gotten made if Twilight hadn't been a big deal? Probably not. So I just have to take the good with the bad, but I totally get defensive with this one and very, very mother hen on it.
Can you tell us a little bit about your Osterman experience, and specifically what it was like to work on something that wasn't taken from your own work?
Yeah, it was actually really awesome. It's so much easier making those changes and those little things when you didn't conceive of it then it's a lot more fluid and things can change. And also, it was like a good example for me because Shannon Hale was there all the time, and she loves changing her stuff. She's like, ooh, what if we changed this? What if we did this new thing? She adores, like, reworking the entire story, which is so foreign to my nature. So I'm like, okay. You know, I was watching her, learning. But it was really cool. And the other factor was that this is a comedy. And it was such a different experience to be on a set where the biggest challenge is not laughing while we're doing the take. Because, you know, Twilight's really angsty and everything's very serious, and the actors kind of have to be in this mode, and you would never want to intrude on that. And here we have people just cracking up all the time, and it was so much fun. And like at the end of a really long day, your stomach hurts from laughing. You're like, this is not working. This is like being in a really good comedy club all day long for a month and a half. So, you know, it was a very, very fun experience. Also, we were filming on a manor in England, and it was gorgeous every day. So it was kind of like a fantasy camp rather than work.
Sounds like fun.
It was so much fun.
My question is, the host obviously involved romance, but were there other larger messages you were intending to say through the novel? If so, what were they, and what will be the larger message behind the sequel you are currently working on?
Well, I never write in, like, messages. I write out problems. I find a complicated situation, and then I write to see what would happen with it. But I do feel like there is a romance aspect, but it's so much, for me, the book is really about love in all of its forms. You've got the romantic love, but you've got the mother love, and you've got the family love, and you've got the my species that I owe a great deal to love, and then my new species that I'm adopting that I love and want to protect. And it's just like much more real. Our human experience isn't as, you can't boil that down to just loving one person. There's so much more that ties you. And I also feel like there was a lot I got to explore with the idea of, you know, the kind of easy answer, you know, what do you wish for? Oh, world peace. And I got to look at, could humans ever have world peace, and what would we have to give up? And in this version of that future, you know, we've been taken out of the equation, but that's kind of the point, like our individual likes and dislikes, the things that we would die for, the things we're passionate about, all that has to be erased for there to be this total peace. And is that too high a cost? I think maybe some people would say there's no such thing as too high a cost for perfect peace and health and comfort for everyone in the world. But if we had to all give ourselves up, I don't think we'd do it either. So there was a lot more in it for me. As far as the sequel, all of these insights into the novel come after it's done. Right now, the sequel is just about it's just about kind of these exciting things that happen. I mean, it's just an adventure story for me right now, and I'm sure I'll find the bigger picture when I have it finished.
So the landscape in the host is pretty much as far away from Twilight as you can get, with so much of it taking place in the desert and underground. Can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind that and how it affects the story?
Well, I mean, this one's my home. I'm a desert person. I grew up in the desert, and as a child, I always dreamed about, I mean, I'd never actually been to Washington before I wrote Twilight. That's what I dreamed about, green places where it rained all the time and there were water in the streams. And so when I was writing Twilight, I was writing this, like, you know, fantasy version of this place I'd always kind of wanted to live. When I wrote the host, I wrote what I knew and where I lived, except for the underground part. I don't live underground.
But
that was kind of the fantasy element, was creating this underground world that doesn't actually exist. But the desert is also something I'm very familiar with, and much more going like back to my roots. And I think that's part of this book sort of being more meaningful to me in a lot of ways.
I'm wondering, I've seen it, and
Ooh.
I'm wondering if you can allude to any surprises that people might not know from the book to the movie. Anything you can allude to?
Surprises? Huh. I'm totally drawing a blank here.
Maybe in some casting choices?
Okay, I know what you're talking about. I don't want to say anything about that. I mean, I don't know how long that can be under wraps, but definitely as long as possible.
Is there any way you could say anything that we could, so we could allude to it in our article, allude to some surprises coming?
I think if you just want to say, there are surprises coming, things that aren't out on the table as far as, everything you've seen coming into it, but I wouldn't say more than that, But you know how I am. I'm such a Nazi about spoilers. I just like to I like people to be able to see things and read things and experience things without preconceived expectations. It makes it more fun.
Okay. You would say it would follow as closely to the book as possible for book fans?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like we obviously had to make some changes, but the heart of it is really strongly tied to the novel.
About the future of the series, when the Twilight films were cast and made, you had completed the series, but now you've finished the first Host film, but the series isn't finished. How much do you think your writing is going to be influenced by the actors and the set and what has been played out on the film?
I imagine there might be a little bit of bleed, but I don't think it'll be too bad because I had the sequels outlined before we started making the film. It was just one of those things that's been backburnered for so long because obviously there was the Twilight stuff. It had to be finished, and then doing all the, filming all these movies has taken a whole lot of time, and so it's been pushed into the back. I would love to get it done soon enough that it would all make sense moving forward with movies, but I don't think it'll change too much because I have although what changes is life changes. It's funny, I had the characters all kind of laid out, and as I was working on the sequel, another character who's kind of inspired from another part of, just my life suddenly cropped up that was new and now is affecting the story, which is always interesting. If I'd written this story 3 years ago, it would be a different story than it's going to be. And if I wrote it 5 years from now, it'd probably be somebody else that would pop up into it. And so it's interesting just how your own life and comes into play. But I don't think that the actors will affect me too much.
Okay, my question is, will we get a glimpse of any of the previous worlds or life forms that Wanderer or any of the souls had before? Because I just loved all the imagery of all those different, the background, I guess, of all those different lives and things.
That's a sad question because the answer is no, and that makes me really sad. We had some really great ideas, but this was actually an independent film. This wasn't done with a studio. And so the budget was, it was a big budget for an independent movie, but it was really tight, and we were making decisions like, okay, we can only afford one helicopter in this scene, so we have to write it back from 3. And we actually filmed the last scene of the movie was in the script, and then we took it out. We had to sacrifice it to pay for some other things, and then we ended up being able to save enough money that we did go and shoot the last scene right after the Twilight premiere of Breaking On 2. We actually didn't get to sleep for like 3 days straight there. And so even like the last scene of the movie, which when you see it, I don't think you'll be able to imagine it without that. But there were a lot of sacrifices being made, and unfortunately, seeing those other worlds was one of them. But the good part of that is that, like, in my head, I know what the Bears planet looks like and what they look like, and it's amazing, but there is that fear that if somebody else would do it and it wouldn't be as amazing, and what if it was cheesy? What if the bats looked ridiculous and ugly? And then that kind of ruins it for people. So at least now people's imaginary worlds aren't going to be tainted.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry I couldn't say yes.
That's okay, as long as it's not cheesy.
Yeah, exactly.
My question is, music was such a huge part of the Twilight saga, both with your playlist for the books and then, going into the movie soundtracks. Now, do you see music as being a big part in the film adaptation of The Host? And in addition, are you finding any particular band inspiring as you work on a sequel to The Host?
It's interesting. The Host is, I feel like, a more grown-up story, and even though our actors are not too different in age because Saoirse because we wanted her. We knew she was the right person, so everything got aged down a little bit. It doesn't change that the movie is more mature, and the music it wasn't really ever a big discussion because it just didn't fit. The movie will mostly be score, and oddly enough, and I don't think it's connected, but maybe it is. I've actually been listening to a lot of score as I'm writing now. I'm mostly listening to a playlist I have of just really good movie scores that I'm into, like 28 Weeks Later, and I love that one right now, and that kind of thing. So I'm not sure how much is life imitating art, vice versa, whatnot. But we do still have the cool Imagine Dragons song will be featured. And so that's awesome because I love that band. I just saw them perform live. If you ever get the chance to do that, do so. They're fantastic.
Great, thank you. It's interesting that it has changed for this movie and your work.
Yeah, I mean,
as you go forward.
It has such a different feel in so many ways. And we were talking about the comparisons before, and I think when someone sees the movie, it won't remind them of Twilight. It just doesn't have the same feel. Okay, you know what? I want to go back because I was passed a note of funny stories from set.
Yes.
So I'm going to go back and answer that one, and I will tell you.
One of the funniest days I had, but again, it doesn't really involve any of the actors or anything. For the last day of shooting, we were on top of Horseshoe Mesa, which was an extreme climb to get up there. We didn't even know if we would make it up there alive. It was a little bit of a scary drive. And we were there all day long. Now, legally, I'm pretty sure you have to have bathrooms close by. It was at least an hour drive back down to camp, and they didn't want to make that drive again because it was so treacherous. So there were no bathroom facilities atop the mountain. Most of the people working on a movie set are men. For them, not that big of a deal. For those of us few women, it was
quite a lot.
and so they brought some kind of portable toilet, which was a tent and a bucket, basically.
But no one had got to set it up.
So by the end of the day, it was kind of like, okay, we're just going to do this. We will set up the toilet. So myself, my partner in crime, Megan, and then Allie, who is Jake's girlfriend, we're like, this is happening. And we found as secluded as we could get, although they're still shushing us the whole time because, we couldn't stop giggling. We're trying to set this up, and it's really windy, and it keeps blowing over, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to use it without being, revealed or knocked over. It's really horrific. But so what we had to do eventually was stand and hold the tent post and the tarp closed around it while the person inside
was trying to pee with some level of dignity, with none.
And we were dying laughing. I mean, we couldn't stop, and we kept getting in trouble because they're giggling and peeing, and they're like, shh, we're filming a movie. And we're like, you don't have bathrooms for us. So it was funny and also scarring.
So lately, Stephenie, a lot of your work has shifted from writing books to pretty much making books into films. You produced Austinland, now Anna Dressed in Blood, and The Host. Do you envision your future to be more about telling stories through films or telling stories through books?
Well, my hope is to transition back to doing writing most of the time and having the producing thing be sort of a sideline. And that's been the plan for a while. I don't know if there's a right way to explain how you keep getting sucked into these things, but it's like fantasy football a little bit. Like if my husband actually got the chance, like he loves to play that, and someone came to him and said, okay, we're actually going to assemble these real players that you like and play games. Do you want to do that? He would be like, yes. And so it's hard because for me, that is how I play fantasy football. I used to read books, and I would cast them in my head. I mean, I still do. When I read something, I think, oh, it's so cool to see this scene or see that scene, which is how Austinland happened, because when I read it, it was so obviously like a visual experience that I could just see how it would be, what it would look like. And I wanted to see it be real the same way when you read a book that you love and the movie version might not be perfect, but you still want a chance to see those scenes if they can get them right. And so Austinland was this kind of one-shot thing where I was actually getting a chance to play my fantasy football league, and this was going to be amazing. And then Down a Dark Hall, which is a book I read as a young child that scared the crap out of me when I was 8. Like, Lois Duncan was a big part of my childhood. I loved her, and that was my favorite of her books. And all of a sudden, oh, hey, it's available. Do you want to take a shot at it? And then, sure, you can be responsible and say, I really shouldn't. I've got so much writing to do. But instead, you say, yes, we will take the rights to that and try and make it into a movie. And so that's how, and it's because it's like this fantasy league that I'm playing right now in my head. And it sounds horribly irresponsible, but it's really fun. And I have my partner, and we're phasing towards her being the on-set person and the more involved, and so I can stay home and write. But we're still in flux right now trying to get that done. We probably need an assistant and maybe like a staff of 6. So maybe we'll get there, and that'll free up the time more. But I do hope to be writing after the host tour before the Austinland tour. Press is the bane of my existence. That's the one that really just is a huge time suck.